attendees are arriving. You're in the session Acute Stress Disorder in the Midst of COVID-19 and Racial Injustices. And we'll get started in just a minute. Watching everyone come in. If you want to put in the chat where you are located and say hi, you can do that. We're down to the last session. It's been such an amazing conference. Oh my goodness. And so we're so glad. I'm on the ATN, Janine McConaughey, I'm on the ATN board of directors, and we are so glad that you have come, that you have been such a great group to work with, and we appreciate you being here. Still coming in, I think. Probably getting about ready to load the video.
See you all next year.
In Houston.
So we are so excited to go to Houston next year. We will be in person, but we have learned so much during this conference that's been beneficial to us, and probably some elements of this will be incorporated in that. But today, our presenters are Ayana Malone and Miriam Lane, and they are actually going to be introducing themselves as part of their slides. But I'm always excited when I moderate in a session where there are two collaborators present. It just adds just synergy to the moment. So they are both a part of the Onyx therapy group, and I am excited. This is the session I would have drawn, and so I'm excited to hear, and I'm going to hand it over to them now.
Good morning, good afternoon. I'm going to go ahead and start presenting and sharing my screen.
And we just want to also start by saying we are two very interactive people. So please be ready to have your chat fingers together, to unmute yourselves, to join us in conversation. We're really looking forward to having a discussion, a conversation. We are therapists after all, so we're going to set you up for that warning at the very beginning.
Yes, just as Janine said, you're here for acute stress disorder in schools in the midst of COVID-19 and social unrest, dual pandemics. Mm-hmm. Why is this work important? I'm Miriam Lane. I'm a professional school counselor in one of the counties in Maryland.
And I'm Ayana Malone. I'm the Director of Education and Training for Onyx Therapy Group.
Our objectives for today: participants will be able to identify what acute stress disorder looks like in children and adolescents, and discuss treatment options to decrease the likelihood of a post-traumatic stress disorder diagnosis.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So let's give you a little more information about ourselves. Like I said, I am Miriam Lane. I have a bachelor's in arts in elementary education. I have a master's in counseling, and I have an ed specialist degree in administration and leadership. I'm an ed consultant and trainer with Onyx Therapy Group. I am a school counselor currently, a mom of two little girls and a wife, and I am a certified elementary school educator.
Mm-hmm. So I'm Ayana Malone again. It's really funny that under my credentials, I was like, I'm a Black Caribbean woman. But yes, I am from the Caribbean, the United States Virgin Islands, where it is not currently snowing, unlike Baltimore, where it is currently snowing, and I am located right now. As I said before, I'm the Director of Education and Training. Onyx Therapy Group is a therapy group that's located, headquartered in the Washington, D.C. area. We have 4 offices in DC. We have an office in Pittsburgh, and we just recently opened another office in Minnesota, which is super exciting as we're moving out west. And we are a therapy group of 21 counselors and 5 educational consultants, education trainers. And so we're so super excited to be able to blend our belief in education as well as mental health, and finding ways to these creative overlaps, to really bring awareness into the school. And so Miriam and I are 2 of the educational consultants that work with that therapy group. I am a doctoral student. No, hold on. I'm a doctoral candidate. I have to keep remembering to change that language. I am on chapter 4 of my dissertation, where I am studying involuntary minorities, teacher disposition, and professional development. I'm a mom of a little boy. He's 4. He's actually, his preschool was closed today, so he's taking a nap. And I am a certified special education administrator, as well as special education teacher. I focused on emotional and behavior disorders. And so we're going to start today by really laying the foundation of understanding what is acute stress disorder and how it shows up in schools, right? So one of the ways I like to describe acute stress disorder is that it's a triangle, right? It's like this perfect storm of things that happen that create trauma. And since we're here at this conference, everyone is probably very familiar with a lot of those, experiences, a lot of those milestones, a lot of those changes in a child's life that create trauma. So I like to think of it, or what are root causes of trauma, ACEs, which I'm sure everyone is familiar with, the adverse childhood experiences, and then life in context. And so that's where Miriam and I are really going to talk specifically when we get to the second point of this presentation about these dual pandemics that are happening in our country. You have the global health pandemic of COVID-19, which has upended everything. Again, we're all in our own homes, right? Last year we were in Atlanta having a great time eating awesome food. At least I was, and Miriam was. And this year I'm in my house with my 4-year-old asleep, in his bedroom, right? Things have changed. And then if you couple that with some of the, kind of wild things that we're seeing taking place in our society right now, it's an amalgam of life and context that our students are facing. And we're not here to be political. I want to be very clear. We're not here to be political. We're not here to judge. We're here to talk about what our students are dealing with and the lens in which they see, and it creates trauma in their own lives, which they bring to school. Thank you. So, as many of you know, and I think you all can use the chat functioning, so I absolutely, please chat us. When you see this picture, have you seen this picture before? Is it familiar to you? Is it sparking curiosity? Is it like, wow, I never thought about it like that? So please feel free to, interact within that chat. As I show you this first picture. One of the things that when I am working with the school system, especially, if you weren't here for the introduction, I talked about my specialty in special education is emotional and behavioral disorders, right? As we know, diagnosing an emotional and behavioral disorder is extraordinarily difficult. right? And it's difficult because you can't always separate a trauma response or a traumatic event that happened with, is it truly an emotional or behavioral disorder, right? And this is why, right? Because if you're in special education, you know, there's cognitive testing, there's, you know, achievement testing, there's all sorts of psychological testing that happens. And if you look at a normal brain versus a brain that has experienced trauma, you can see that trauma actually injures the brain. So I often explain it to parents when I have to deliver a tough, you know, classification for special education. You know, is it the chicken or the egg, right? You know, when we talk about brain damage, we talk about traumatic brain injuries, right? We're talking about cerebral palsy. We talk about these kind of external factors that create a brain injury. We often don't talk about trauma as creating a brain injury, which you can see right here when you look at this exoscan of the brain. What's important about how trauma injures the brain is the idea that it's mostly focused, you can see from this picture, in your prefrontal cortex, right? What does that control? That controls impulse, that controls emotional, that emotions, that controls, you know, ordered thinking, right? Executive functioning, you know, we in SPED like to say, you know, executive functioning quite a bit, right? If the trauma has actually damaged that part of the brain, then it goes without saying, and talking about students that are going to have strong trauma responses that mirror a brain injury or a brain disability, right? So when you are going back to, you know, your respective schools, whatever your role is, the first thing you have to remember is what the actual impact of trauma looks like. And it's important to note, poverty is traumatic, right? You know, divorce is traumatic. Changing households, moving is traumatic. Not everyone's response to trauma is the same, but that does not mean that a trauma has not actually happened. So let's talk a little bit more about acute stress disorder. Another thing that I like to talk about when referring to trauma is how trauma can be generational, right? I love this quote by the author of Memoirs of a Geisha. And it's this idea of one little thing can happen within a family, right? And the reactions, the ongoing context of whatever that one little thing that happened can continue to ripple. Over here, you have this picture, and it talks specifically about breaking that generational cycle of trauma. But more so than me talking about, you know, what you're reading on the slide, I want you to think about some of the students that you work with in your schools, right? And how it seems like, you know, the trauma is really passed down through the family. Oftentimes, you know, that phrase, I know we say it all the time, that apple did not fall far from that tree and roll away, right? Because if we often, especially again in special education, when I think of behavior and conduct disorder or mood disorder, oftentimes I can meet the parent and I'll be like, oh, yes, right? I hope you were out there nodding your head because it is very common, especially with kids with strong anger responses. Those kids who would cuss me out left, right, and center. I'd call mom, I'd call dad, I'd call grandma, I'd call auntie, and they cuss me out too, right? And so I could clearly see that this was not just a kid focused situation. It could have been an entire family focused situation, or an entire family who never dealt with some initial trauma and just passed it down through how they reacted to their child or their own childhood, right? So when something goes unprocessed, and we'll talk about acute stress disorder going unprocessed, it creates post-traumatic stress disorder. That's what happens after 6 months. You're going to change that diagnosis. And if it's never addressed, you are just teaching the next generation that this is how we deal with it. So trauma being generational. And then lastly, as you all probably well know, being at this conference, trauma impairs relationships, right? When I think about what we're going to talk about in terms of COVID-19, as well as the social unrest, dual pandemics that have been happening, we see relationships fractured, right? We see, people reacting to something they find traumatic, right? Whether they find police brutality traumatic, or whether you find, you feel like freedom's being taken away traumatic, right? You react to that and it impairs your relationships. It impairs your ability to relate with others. If you don't think that's true, just go on Facebook for a day, for an hour, and see the infighting, the going back and forth, the I'm not speaking to this family member, I'm done with them. We were friends for 20 years, now we're not friends anymore, and whether that's right or wrong, is not our judgment call. Our judgment call is to talk about that is usually a root cause of trauma, right? Because you are traumatized by something that has occurred. Like I said, whether it be, you're watching, murders, you're watching riots, you're watching protests, you're watching, et cetera, that's causing a trauma response in your mind. Okay. So let's keep going, Miriam. And so one of the things that I want to talk about before we get into the clinical features of acute stress disorder is what I call the two towers of acute stress disorder, okay? When you think of the clinical responses, these are the two you are going to see, especially in a school setting, right? You're going to see anger and you're going to see emotional dysregulation. What's interesting about anger is that it's not just anger directed outward, it's also anger directed inward, which is depression, right? So students who present as depressed, you can think of that as their anger directed inward, right? And then you have your explosive students where you see that anger directed outward. Anger, the root of most anger, I would dare say all anger, are hurt feelings. That's something I find people really do not understand. And oftentimes, not necessarily when we're talking about the global pandemic, when we're talking about the social unrest, when we have been talking about the ongoing battles, who's right, who's wrong, who did what to whom, who are we backing, et cetera, what happened at the when you think about so much of the anger response that you're seeing, it comes from hurt feelings, right? And it comes from unaddressed hurt. It comes from unaddressed concern. It comes from unaddressed worry, fear, anxiety, right? I keep saying unaddressed on purpose, right? Because that's how it becomes acute, right? So when you see kids coming in angry in the morning, most good school counselors like Miriam or, other social worker or student support services, they will tell you the first thing you should do, what happened? What happened this morning? Right? Coming in, calm down, what's wrong? Get it together. No, you're just inviting more response. The first thing is you've got to figure out, well, what happened? Okay, you missed the bus and then your mom wouldn't take you to school. And so you're pissed off. No, your feelings are hurt, right? And you don't necessarily have to say it to the student that way, but you can interpret it. Your feelings were hurt because your parent chose not to drive you to school even though you missed the bus, right? What do we do with facing anger? We should not fear it. So oftentimes when I've witnessed folks at different protests, and you know how they kind of come to a head, and you have the one side here and the one side here, and they're arguing back and forth, and oftentimes it escalates, so bad. The problem often is we fear anger in other people. And so I'm going to give you guys a secret. Like I said, special educator focused on emotional and behavioral disorders. The absolute worst thing I could do when a kid was coming for my throat, coming for my neck, is to show that I was scared. You can't fear it. In your mind, yes, the gift of fear is there. So you're going to protect yourself. You're going to be smart. You're not going to put yourself in harm's way. But more often than not, what can diffuse anger is the refusal to be afraid of that anger you see, right? How do you do that? Emotional regulation, right? Being able to take that deep internal breath, put on your poker face, sometimes make a statement. Oh, I see that you're angry. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then buy time, I'm good at buying time with silence. I believe in a good awkward silence. Okay. Mm-hmm. You're angry. Mm-hmm. Get it. But that's emotional regulation. What we're talking about as these two towers of acute stress disorder is emotional dysregulation. That is that inability to be able to control your own emotional response. So it's similar to anger, but it doesn't just involve anger. Anger is very specific. Emotional dysregulation is that out of control. It's that crying. It's that, anxiety. It's that, constant questioning, these behaviors that we're all like, man, this kid is crazy. What is crazy? Crazy is out of control emotions, right? That's what crazy typically means when we're saying that, especially in a school setting, because in a school setting, a lot of school professionals are not therapists. So they're just like, yo, this kid is crazy. Those out of control emotions. That is harder to handle than anger. But what I will say is start with that anger response, which is don't fear it, right? So I remember seeing a video of a young lady who had her, and to be fair, when you see these videos on YouTube, et cetera, you might not have the whole context. So I want to appreciate that I might not have the entire context. But what we saw was this young lady, her head is down on her desk. She's crying, she's unresponsive, et cetera. The security guard comes in and it becomes an immediate battle royale, right? That is absolutely not a response to emotional dysregulation. That's actually a fear response because you don't know what to do. So you react with what you're given. Whereas, just like when the anger comes towards you with a student is experiencing acute stress reaction, you can't fear it, right? You can't back away from it. And so when, Miriam starts talking to you from the therapeutic aspect around the COVID-19 and social unrest, that's our most important, I think, takeaway in this conversation is not to fear it, not to back away from it. It's actually to lean in. I see you are X, Y, and Z. I hear you are X, but I'm taking Miriam's part, so I won't. Let's keep going and talk about some clinical features. What you see there is the DSM-5, classifications for both acute stress disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder. So like I had said before, post-traumatic stress disorder does not begin as PTSD. It begins as acute stress disorder, right? And that's where you're talking about an acute event has happened, right? And you have this space of time. You know, I like to tell my parents, you have this space of time. It averages about 6 months, right? Sometimes it could be a little longer. Sometimes it could be a little shorter because, you know, all people are different. All kids are different. But that's where you get that sharp spike in anxiety, correct? That's where, you know, the sleeplessness begins. That's where the anger begins. That's where the dysregulation begins. So oftentimes, because kids spend so much time in school, we are some of the first people who notice that acute stress disorder response. In this virtual setting, because I am working at a school where we are virtual, we see it as the kids won't turn on the camera. Well, first of all, the kids won't log in. Let's be honest. They won't log in. But then they won't turn on the camera. Or then they turn on the camera and it's a mess. The kid looks like a mess. The room looks like a mess. There's people screaming in the background, you know, et cetera, et cetera. That's when we're sort of like, okay, something's not right. This is where it becomes acute. And it's so important for schools to respond with a social emotional response, because if you continually let this go on, it turns into post-traumatic stress disorder, right? Because the acute event is over. So that's why it's post-traumatic. What I will say about this global pandemic and kids being out of school for so long, or being in a virtual space for so long, is that many of these kids have crossed over into PTSD, right? I think of the kids who have missed out on huge life events like graduation, prom, et cetera, that's going to take, you know, some time for them to go over. And then I feel like a lot of other students who perhaps have not had such a sharp anxiety reaction, you're really seeing it now, because it's coming up on a year, right? It's coming up on a year where their lives have been turned upside down. Let's go to the next slide, Miriam. Okay. So continuing with this idea of what the clinical features of acute stress disorder look like: shame, survivor's guilt, mistrust. I was going to say going crazy, but emotional dysregulation, lack of interest, the inability to self-soothe. That's another big one that we see, especially with students in this virtual space, because oftentimes, you know, students, especially students with specific needs, you know, they need help. It's hard, right? It's hard navigating your iPad, your Chromebook, whatever is happening. The Wi-Fi is weak, et cetera, and they just flip out and then turn off their camera or log out completely, right? In a classroom, we're able to walk that student through the frustration, right? Even as teachers, okay, it's okay. We'll try it like this. We'll have you try making the screen bigger, turn it off and turn it back on again, right? But because we don't have that same proximity, students have to soothe themselves through these anxiety producing moments, and they're not able to do that. They don't know how to do that. I told you guys that I am a parent of a very lively 4-year-old, and he hands me the tablet all the time. It's not working. Depending on what I'm doing, I'm like, okay, well, let's figure out what's happening. Other times I'm like, okay, well, you have to figure it out because I'm on Zoom, right? So I don't have time to figure out why the Wiggles is not playing on your tablet. And what does he do? He goes running out of the room, bawling his eyes out, right? So even I, as a parent who knows better, sometimes cannot soothe my own kid because I'm on Zoom, right? I'm working from home. So that is leading to this idea of my world is out of control. And it leads to the last bullet, which is that numbing effect, right? That desensitization. And you have probably had kids on your Zoom, just sitting there looking like this. They're probably doing other things, let's be honest. There's probably the TV over there, et cetera, et cetera. We had an IEP meeting and we had to have a whole discussion with a mom and her daughter that she couldn't be in the kitchen, like making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Like she'd just be in the middle of class, making herself a snack, a sandwich. She could care less what we were doing. She was like, well, I'm on screen, I'm here. Mind you, it's an elementary school, so she was probably all of 8, and so she was just totally desensitized to the whole process, which means her learning will ultimately suffer in the long run. Okay. And then.
All right.
So I want to say before we transition, I wonder if we have any questions, because we can't see the questions on our side.
We did not have questions.
Not happening. Okay, well, we really encourage questions, feedback. Talk to us. All right.
All right.
Ayana?
That was,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Erica?
It's when we tried to put up a question, it says the chat's been disabled.
Oh,
Okay.
Are you in the chat in Pathable or in the chat in Zoom?
I'm in the chat in Zoom.
Okay, the one in Zoom will be disabled, but I'm monitoring the one in Pathable. If you can pull that up too.
Thank you all. Thank you for that clarification.
yes. Okay, so while you guys are pulling up Pathable, I hope that you will ask several questions, as I'm sure a lot of light bulbs have gone off this far. Ayana shared a wealth of knowledge on ASD and what it looks like in students, and I'm going to dig a little bit deeper. As a school counselor, virtually, it has been such a impact on my life because I had to figure out how to reach students through the screen and help them learn how to cope with what's going on. And that's a struggle when oftentimes I'm speaking to a dark screen, or I'm trying to tell the parent, you have to get them into school. They have to log in. And so a lot of our children, especially where I work, they have, before this pandemic, have experienced a lot of trauma that has caused some acute stress disorder. But this pandemic and the other civil unrest that we have encountered has definitely caused my students to experience that at a different level. So let's talk about some examples of life events that create ASD and some clinical solutions. Before we go really deep, I want us to do a mindfulness activity. I thought it would be great for us to go into some breakout rooms to discuss this activity. So I want you to imagine yourself as a second grade student. Before we even get there, this mindfulness activity, you as an adult have probably experienced this right now because we're all quarantined, if not, having hybrid situations. So we understand, but going into the mind of a second grader, of an elementary student, it's different. So let's try to put ourselves in the mind of a second grade student. Everything that you have ever known to be normal has come to a complete halt. You now have to wear a mask wherever you go. Your favorite places to go are shut down. You cannot visit your family or friends. School is closed, and now your parents have told you your grandparents are both in the hospital. So I want you, we're going to go in a group. I want you all to discuss how might you feel as that second grade student, thinking about what Ayana discussed earlier, thinking about where you are mentally, physically, how might you show up in class? So at this time, we can go into our breakout rooms. Thank you, Scott.
Can you send me to a breakout, or I don't know, I didn't see the join button.
Okay, is that Charlene?
Yes, ma'am.
I think it's still coming.
Oh, here we go.
'Cause, yeah, I was gonna say, I see the number ticking down. I think
All right,
there's
thank you.
Thank you. Because I guess, yeah, it does take a lot to.
Yeah, I didn't realize it's a lot on. Oh, there we go.
I'm glad we have the help.
Mm-hmm. All right, everyone's in a room. For the next slide, I'm just gonna have them share out how they showed up cognitively and
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that they're still.
Of the room set for like 6 minutes. If you want me to close them earlier, just say so.
Okay.
It's 4:05, Miriam. So I think we're doing pretty good on time.
Yeah.
You did CFSA last week, right?
I did it.
Oh, that was
No,
Desiree.
yeah. No, actually, yeah.
Mhm.
I did it. I've only done it once so far.
Okay. Oh, I keep forgetting to look at the slides on my phone. I'm like, they are right here on my phone. And then, Scott, I had said, not now when you assign me to a room, but I think I would like to be assigned to a room.
Yeah, I was gonna join.
If it's not too much trouble to throw me in one. Oh, here we go. Oh, well, no.
Which one did you join, Ayana?
Is it possible to get another minute for them in the breakout room? the one I joined, they were having a great conversation.
Yeah, mine too.
You have to redo it again and put us back because it
Oh,
it
it
shut us
brought
down.
some people back.
It shut us
Okay.
down. It's bouncing us back now.
Okay. Oh, well, next time we'll give people more time because that was,
Yeah.
people
I
were
love
like
the
really
process.
like, oh, this is good. And then I
Yes.
saw like 20 minutes, seconds left. I was like, no, let them keep talking. But maybe we could talk as a group.
That's what I was, yep, I was just about to say
Really,
that. We'll be able to
really big group.
share out.
You'll probably put a lot of things on. Like, did you want us not to be able to start our videos intentionally?
Oh, no.
Huh? I
Yeah, we
think
can't start our videos.
What was that?
I said we can't start our videos because it says the host has stopped it.
Okay.
So I know that was something intentional that you just don't want us to be showing our face. Some people, or
So this is the moderators going to jump in, and it's kind of an automatic reset. I don't know
I
if
have you.
we can fix it or not.
But that's fine. But I want to take your time. You go, I'm done. Sorry. Let me go myself on mute.
You don't have to, Miss Charlene.
Scott,
I like these people.
is it okay for you to spotlight us again? So it's not bouncing. I think it bounces back and forth. Ayana, yeah, me. There we go. Yeah. All right. So I was able to join a room. Ayana was too, and you guys were having some rich conversation around this. A lot of you all could actually relate because you're experiencing it with your students in your classrooms. And so I want us to go a little bit deeper. And we know that COVID and acute stress disorder is definitely, am I still sharing my screen?
No.
No?
You need to reshare, I think.
I see, because I just went to the next thing. And all right. There we go. Sorry about that. Yes, we know COVID and acute stress disorder are going hand in hand. I'm sure in the months and years to come, we're going to see a lot of this show its face, and most likely in PTSD, if we don't address it. And as teachers and educators, we definitely can look out for the signs and the symptoms of students coming into our classrooms showing some acute stress disorder. Many of our students have experienced family members having COVID, watching them going to the hospital, watching their family members really stress out and not know what to do, not knowing if they're going to make it, or possibly dying because of COVID, and having to not say goodbye to a grandparent that helped raise you, and having to attend a funeral online. There's so many things that our students have seen and gone through, coupled with not seeing their friends and not seeing their teacher. I have a kindergarten who wasn't able to experience her first year in kindergarten. Yes, she doesn't know what school is like, but she knows that it was a place to go and be around other kids her age and to meet another adult that was going to teach her. So it's a lot of things that our students experience. Just like Ayana said, a senior wanting to walk across the stage and graduate and not have their face flashed on the screen for their family to see. That's going to stick with our students for years, months, years to come. So tell me, and this is where we can have this conversation, how are these three areas of students functioning impacted by the health pandemic? How is their cognition impacted? How is their behavior impacted? How is the affect and emotion impacted? How might this show up in our second grade student here?
Difficulty concentrating.
Yes, that is probably one of the main things I see on the screen now. Just like Ayana said, and her student making food in the middle of class, that is, something that we don't do in our daily life in school. So concentrating and focusing on academics can't happen if you're making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. But then also knowing that someone passed away and you didn't get to say goodbye also could cause you not to be able to concentrate and focus. Anyone else?
Can I just also go back to the peanut butter and jelly thing? Because what it makes me think about is food is comforting. And I'm wondering if in that particular situation, because our kids don't always have the words to articulate how they're impacted by what's happening, but perhaps making that peanut butter and jelly sandwich is, it's not about consuming the food, but just about, it's a coping skill because it's comforting. It's a comfort.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know, that is where teachers have to meet students where they are too. I have several teachers that do cooking for their classes, whatever they have in their refrigerator, or they may send out a little recipe that's easy to come by, you know, that the parents can buy, that they do together. Because like you said, cooking is like relationship building, it's comforting, and you're getting a chance to get out of that world of academics, world of teaching and sitting and doing the same thing on the screen. So absolutely, that definitely is a way of finding comfort. Because I know I definitely have been eating some things to find comfort during this time. How
I
might
would say also maybe depression, you know,
Yes.
feeling depressed, you know, sad feelings of sadness and not really knowing why they're sad.
Exactly.
Like taking on everybody else's feelings and incorporating their moods.
Exactly. That transference there, you are literally picking up on, or someone else is transferring their feelings on there. You know, oftentimes we, in our family unit, if someone else is stressed and they're showing it, it's going to end up, you know, attaching to your children or your spouse, and they're going to have that same stress or anxieties from whatever you're experiencing. They may not have had that same experience, but definitely they're going to have it. So just like Ayana said earlier, it's important as educators, we have to put on that face like, all right, you know, we got this, we're going to be here, we're going to comfort you. We can't show the fear, even though we feel that way. We have to show that we're there for them. Because if we start to panic or we start to show like, wait a minute, I just don't feel right, they're going to pick up on that as well.
Can I make a quick point, Miriam? Because I think you said something, and what's important also is understanding that you need to advocate for yourself and for your staff, other staff members that you all need attention to, right?
Yes.
So it is true, we need to be there for our students, but don't forget the other side of it. Miriam and I are just not here talking about that other side of it today, talking about the staff side and what you need to ensure to do to make sure your mental health is strong, or you will not be able to support those students. But I just wanted to make that clear.
You cannot pour from an empty cup. Absolutely.
Yes. And I wanted to pop on because we have some comments in answer to that. So there was depression, forgetfulness, lack of motivation, poor memory, fearful and being worried, headaches, body aches, COVID brain. Yes, poor working memory. And so I wanted to add those into the discussion.
Thank you. And definitely that detached, you sitting on the camera like this, I'm just showing my face because I know I have to, you know, that detached demeanor of, I just don't even know what to feel right now. I don't even know if this is going to end. Also, one thing that I thought was interesting, we may see students become more hyper. Anxiety shows itself in so many different ways. And hyperness is one of those. And so we often want to put another label when we see students being hyper, but that's a way of showing that they have some type of trauma that has happened in their life. They're trying to find ways to stop thinking about it, or if I move and I'm constantly getting into something, I have no time to sit with my thoughts. As adults, we do that. Sometimes we tend to stray away from sitting and thinking about things that have occurred in our lives that that are possibly traumatic for us. So it's important that we teach students how to be vocal and advocate their feelings and talk about their emotions. You know, I've been teaching my staff that community circles, it's a great time to talk to your students about how are they feeling, especially in my county, we're getting ready to go back into the building. So it's a good time to check in. How are you feeling? What are your fears? What are your thoughts? All of those things. Thank you guys for sharing out. So we kind of touched on this, but how might you show up in school virtually? And for those that are back into brick and mortar, how might you show up there as well? And anybody can just call out.
We had one comment. Whoops, it moved. Okay, frustration with COVID safety procedures for my in-person students. So the frustration.
Yes, they're going to have to adapt. I mean, to say, I've been thinking as the counselor, usually I have students in my office, I'm able to do small groups, some one-on-one, having them to say, we have to be 6 feet. You know, how is that, how does that look? How is that student going to feel that I can, comfort, or they can trust me because now we're 6 feet apart. So that you're no longer having that confidentiality because my office isn't that big. So yes, definitely the procedures and the new way of how students have to be in the classrooms now, that's definitely going to cause some acute stress disorder, for sure. How might you communicate to the teachers of the classroom? Remember, you're still that second grade student. So how might you communicate to your teachers and your classmates? What do you think this is going to look like? For those of you all that are already back in brick and mortar, maybe you can share, what does it look like for those second graders or those elementary students who are back into that building, communicating with their teachers and classmates? And virtually, what does it look like? And Janine, if anyone is sharing in the chat.
Yeah, I haven't gotten any comments yet.
Okay. So this could be some classmates or this student may be afraid to speak. They may be afraid to say something. Go ahead, Janine. I see you pop up.
Insecure, quote unquote, clingy, hoarding, anxious returning to school. I have a granddaughter that's anxious about returning right now. Students are not sure where they feel safe, acting out behavior because I don't have the words to convey how I'm feeling.
Yep.
Struggling to wear masks consistently. Oh, yes.
Yes, all of those. And that's their communication. I'm taking this mask off. They may not say why, but I didn't have to wear it at home at all while I was virtual. So why am I wearing it here all day? Running up to their friends and hugging them and wanting to be by them and attaching themselves to the teacher because they haven't seen them all year. Those are ways that they're going to communicate. Yes, they're happy, but then also there may be some that will shy away because they're so afraid of COVID. They're so afraid of what they've heard about it. So there's going to be a lot of different emotions that come about when students are trying to communicate to their teachers and their classmates. And of course, we know the possible trauma that may have caused this is right now is COVID-19. But it could also be what other things could stem from COVID-19, not just the virus itself, but what things stem from that. So one way to really understand, just like Ayana said, you have to ask, you have to say, hey, what is going on? You have to meet that student exactly where they are and get to know them and get to know what did they experience while they were home virtually. Students may say, my mom was in the hospital for months. I didn't get to see her, or she's in the hospital now, or whatever the case is. We have to know why they're showing up like this. Before I move on, any questions?
I do have a question. I just need to get back to my document. Okay. The first, one of the questions was it automatically, whoops. I think the difficulty with this topic is that I'm feeling acute stress disorder, hard to support our students when I can feel I can barely navigate my own feelings about the civil unrest, the disturbing political climate, and the stress of virtually everything. What do we do as adults?
Great question. One thing I definitely advocate for is therapy. Not just because this is what we do, but it is. I myself, I go and have therapy, and it works. Ayana's same for her. It's wonders, because I have I diagnosed with anxiety, generalized anxiety, and I can work myself up to the point where I am weeks living in anxiety, and I don't realize it until I've come down from it, and I am drained. I have a crazy headache, and I'm just in a fog. I don't really remember moving through that anxiety. And so having someone to talk to that can clinically walk you through how to deal with that, whether it's breathing exercises, whether it's journaling, whether it's finding things that'll help you cope. Definitely. Also, I know a lot of counties, they offer programs for their teachers and their educators to, they get free services for counseling. They have wellness groups where they have exercise programs and food, because we know food can actually cause you to, be stressed. Depending on what you eat, some foods can make you feel a lot better. So I would say first therapy, but then reach out to your county, your district, to see what they offer too. A lot of times they will offer those things.
I also want to add, I like I said, we are Onyx Therapy Group, so we will always advocate for people, because even I, as someone who, is in this profession, I was like, what is wrong with me? And it took my therapist being like, you know what? We're in the middle of a quarantine. You can't go nowhere. You can't do nothing.
Yep.
Maryland was like that for a very long time, my friends. Still is. We can't eat in restaurants in Baltimore. We can't, and I was talking about how everything felt a little less fun. Macy's was going out of business. So my mom and I were like, ooh, we going to Macy's. We're going to buy everything up. And we were just like, why do I need this dress? I'm not going anywhere in this dress, and I was like, why do I need these boots? I'm not going anywhere. Like, I sit at home in a sweatshirt all day, and it took a lot for me to understand my mindset being shifted. Yeah. I have gone from not believing in meditation to I meditate twice a day, when I get up in the morning and when I go to bed in the evening. I go for daily walks. And again, it depends on what works for you. But like I was saying earlier, self-care during this time is ultimately important. Yes. Because like Miriam said, you can't pour from an empty cup. You cannot support your students who you might have 20, you might have 30 students who are super needy, especially if you're coming back in this building. And if you're here, you can't give them what they need. So take care of yourself first. Be an advocate in your district, your school, whatever it takes. I'm an advocate for giving teachers wellness days. They sit on that Zoom all day. Like Miriam and I are lucky because we get to pop in and out, of the Zoom, or we get to pull kids out, of the Zoom classroom, but you're just on the Zoom all day. Like, that's crazy. Anyway, my point is, be an advocate for self-care for you, right? And give yourself the grace of knowing it's crazy right now. It's wild. It's not anybody's imagination that it's wild right now. Okay. So give yourself that grace.
And let me tell you, it's not going to, once you go to therapy or you're working out or it's not going to happen like right then and there. It has to be something that you consistently do, that self-care, because working on it one day, oh, I took a walk today. It has to be something consistent so that your body now is feeling the love, because you have to give yourself some love. The word grace has been my word of the year. Well, 2020, and it's still the word of the year, because you just have to extend that to everyone.
I have another question, but I just thank you both for saying this. So those who listened to my introduction for Melissa Sadin and talked about my own mental health journey, when the pandemic started, I went and found another therapist. I had moved away from mine, and I went, and what they're saying is absolutely true, that we have to take care of ourselves. So thank you. And the question was, is it reasonable to expect a spike in PTSD once it is over, or will we see those kids just move into PSD from ASD now?
Well, it's like it depends on how their trauma is addressed. And two, some kids are, it may not affect them. So let's say we have two of the same students that experience the very same thing in the same household, right? But one may not have really held on to that traumatic event where another one has, and it is taking them forever to get out of that. I mean, for example, just my brother and myself experiencing my mother's death. We experienced it, our way of getting out of it, totally different. Same mom, same household, same everything, but totally different. So it really is all relative. However, being the educator and making sure those students know you are there and you are communicating with them and letting them know it's okay to communicate their feelings and their emotions will help them be able to not go into the route of PTSD. I hope that answered.
Yeah. So there's a couple more questions, but I'm going to let you guys move on, and then I can save it for the end.
Okay. So here's our next, we're getting into another mindfulness exercise. So we're going to go on a breakout session, but this one is touching base on the civil unrest, and it's student voices that you're going to hear in a second. Well, I'm going to read it, but you're not going to hear, but student voices. So the first one, Black kids don't have the luxury of being unaware of racism and racist violence, he said. Black people seem really mad, he said. My dad says they need to respect police and behave better, and it will be okay. I was starting to kind of notice maybe the American dream wasn't as perfect as it seemed, she said. I remember thinking, oh, I wish I was white, she said. I felt so left out. It's very all talk and no do, he said. There's a lot of white silence. So I'm sorry, let me go back. Oops. So we are going to do another breakout session. And again, these are students speaking. I want you to think of how students will show up, knowing they have experienced the civil unrest that has occurred. How might they show up cognitively, behaviorally? What is their affect and emotion? What does that look like? I see Jennifer, you unmuted. Did you have a question? Oh, okay, sorry. All right. So if we can go into a breakout room, assign some breakout rooms again.
How many?
The same. Ayana.
Can we do 2 or 3? It's only been a year and I'm still on mute.
Yes.
Thank you. Could I be placed in another breakout room? I think I was the only one in that one.
I was in a breakout room by myself, so.
Let's see here.
I was too. I was just sitting there by myself. So I
Oh,
left.
because some haven't. I'm looking. I don't think I can. Oh yeah, I can move. I do have the power to do that. All right.
Many people are saying they're the only one in their breakout room, so I'm not sure if that was.
That's the same.
All right. I just moved someone to a room.
Okay. I just threw my response in the chat because I was the only one in there,
All right.
but I'm more than happy to go to a breakout room. This is phenomenal. Thank you so much.
Oh yes, thank you. I moved someone else to another room. Let's see.
My person got disconnected.
I left my breakout room because there was nobody in there.
For those of us that are here, can we have a discussion here? Or would
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I think that's perfect.
Okay. I dropped in the chat. I feel like there would be a heightened sensitivity to perceived and actual experiences of racism and microaggression, just because of the conversations that they've heard, things that they've seen on the news, social media platform. And so I think that there would just be this extreme sensitivity.
My daughter is biracial, and I know like she has kind of some feelings of just like hopelessness, like that things are not going to change, things are not going to get better. And yeah, and I can see that even reflected in her schoolwork. Sometimes I feel like she feels like, what's the point?
That's interesting that that connection has been made of
How
just
old is your daughter?
16.
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
very aware, right? Very aware.
Yeah,
So
and we
you
have very open conversations about everything, but it's so real, and it's like I can't protect her from anything anymore, and that's hard, but that's where it is.
You know, so I have two boys. One's 21 and one is 19. They're both white, but they're kind of expressing the same feeling that, you know, this is just, it's horrible, and they feel so badly that you know, this is happening in the United States, and they feel kind of the same way, like it's just, you know, like hopeless. You know, they're both in college, and they don't get to interact with people. And so, you know, I mean, as far as being able to have those conversations with people of color and, you know, just their peer groups, you know, those opportunities just aren't there. And so even though they aren't, you know, young men of color, they still are very empathetic and sympathetic to, you know, what is happening in our nation. And it's sad to see that hopelessness and that just feeling of what's the point.
I often, when I talk to my nieces, and you know, they're in their 20s, and I have one that's a teenager, and I often tell them that you all are the ones that are going to have to make that change, regardless of what, you know, your fear is, you know, because we talked about silence, and, you know, you may feel that way, but then when you are speaking for it and advocating for others, it helps people learn and help them have some type of emotion attached to it. And
Right.
so it's important that we tell our young children and our young adults that stand up for what you really truly feel is right. and reach literally across the aisle and know how to support others and just be kind. And I think it's hard for my 5-year-old to say, well, why is this happening over this summer? Why is this happening? And I said, I explained it to her, and I explained that because of the color, sometimes of the color of your skin is often why some people just don't like you. And she couldn't even understand that. She couldn't get that. And I felt so sad because I'm like, you probably will one day experience that. But I hope that because there's so many young adults right now who truly are, like you said, are just like, what in the world? Why is this occurring? Why is this happening? Are going to be those advocates. They're going to speak up, and they're going to lead us in a positive and right direction, that hopefully those experiences become small and few in between.
Right.
I hope. Are you back in person, like doing school in person, or are you still virtual? Because I think one of the boons we've had, especially in the DC area, DMV area, is we have been virtual. So I'm like, this is going to be interesting when they all back in school together. Like right now, it's virtual. There's not changing classes in the hallway. There's not, these interaction points. They're not eating lunch together. So I wonder if you guys are brick and mortar, and if so, what have you noticed?
I'm brick and mortar. Our school has been brick and mortar all year, but I also live in rural white Nebraska. And so my daughter does not have a lot of people that look like her. So I think that's been really hard, other than family, which we've made sure we've stayed connected to a lot of family to give her support through that, because who am I to say one thing or the other in terms of support. But yeah, and just not getting that like interaction at school, that's hard. Like support at school with peers that don't get it.
Right. So so I live in in very white Wyoming, and we have been back brick and mortar all year. And we do have some students of color. We have quite a large Hispanic population, and we do have some African American students. And honestly, we really haven't seen a lot of uprising, I guess. I think that they're all handling it pretty well. They seem to, this generation of kids, like you were saying earlier, really seem to be that group that want to reach across the aisle, that want to bring more acceptance and love and kindness. And so I feel like we've experienced that in our building this year with our students of color. Certainly not perfect, don't get me wrong, but I feel like there has been a greater effort to show some grace and show some kindness and acceptance for everybody, which is great.
I definitely say, don't be afraid to have the conversation. Dana, I heard you say, what am I to say? You can say, I know you're saying I can't say anything from that experience, but you can definitely, just talk and hear.
She hates me, I'm a therapist, we talk a lot. So, but yeah, that's exactly right.
Yes. And I have books on books on books, like literature for my, daughter to see and to read to my students, just so they can just be fully aware of who they are and know that just because of how they look doesn't make them any different from anybody else. I think that's like the main thing. And also to any color, letting them know that no matter what you look like, we're all different. I always tell my students when I do lessons with them, if we all look the same, the world would be so boring. It would be so boring. So, those are the things that we have to allow our students to have conversation about and continue to talk about.
Right.
Oh, Ayana, you're on mute again.
Folks are coming back, I believe. Are all the rooms closed?
They're closing in 27 seconds.
Okay,
And
because
then sharing my screen.
mine says 0, 0. Okay. That's why I'm not the moderator. It's fine. Because I'm like, I don't know.
I'm not sure that I did very well either. I lost my people. So someone was talking and she vanished. So I apologize for the technology and I would love to reconnect, but carry on.
All right, is everyone back? I believe so. All right, so if you want to put in the chat or just tell us what we had a good discussion, because some of us had one person breakout room, so we kind of made our own breakout room here in the main room. And a lot of things that we heard was students, coming cognitively and behaviorally. What are ways that students may show up? And how might they show up? What were some of the things you all discussed? And Janine, if there's any in the chats, would love to hear.
I will watch as they show up.
Okay.
If you see my picture come up, that means I
Gotcha.
Okay, got some reduced energy and reservation. Maybe that was the only one. There we go. Frustrated by people not understanding or empathizing with their experience.
My students feel like it's all pointless.
Yes. Ugh. Everyone is much more elevated and angry than usual.
Mm-hmm.
I have mentioned that in my group that one thing that might be visible to many educators would be like the young people having distrust in white allies. So having seen so much going on or having seen their parents kind of express frustrations with racism or white supremacy, it may show up in these spaces as well, where young people don't trust teachers who are white or providers who are white.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
They also said withdrawn, on edge of hypervigilant. Had one student who came to mind who was very angry and would take it out on their classmates. We don't have the honest conversations in school. Sadly, our social studies curriculum used to be a place to have the considerations of the broader social culture. We barely teach social studies, so we don't discuss and use evidence. And we're in news and communication silos.
Yes.
I was waiting for somebody to bring up that anger.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
There it is. I am from Indiana. And so if you're familiar with Indiana, it's not many African Americans. In certain areas, yes, but where I grew up, no. And so I remember in middle school, we often had KKK rallies down there in downtown, and a lot of students, that was how they were brought up. And I remember in my school we had it wasn't a huge riot, but it was very, I remember it to this day because it was so frightening. I've never seen anything like that. And now thinking back on it, what shocked me is not a teacher spoke on it. So imagine people still walking away, students still walking away with not having answers to what occurred. And so it's important to continue to hold the conversation, to have these conversations, and let students express in a appropriate manner, but express themselves, because they are frustrated. And a lot of these students have heard things in their house and they're bringing it into the school. And so it's important that we as educators, again, teach kindness, teach acceptance, and teach tolerance. Like, those are the three things that I think will help students be able to communicate their emotions and feelings appropriately. So it's the same three questions as earlier. How do you imagine students processing the current landscape of America? So I heard someone say mistrust in the white allies and hopelessness. What else how might they, process this?
Becoming more controlling in their interactions because they have such a feeling of having no control over anything, maybe. So just to try to gain a sense of control, they might be bossing their peers around and trying to take over the class, or I don't know, something along those lines.
No, yeah. I didn't even think of something like that, but that makes I can see exactly what you mean. If you feel like there's hopelessness, but hey, I can control this, I'm gonna show up in a different way. Yeah.
Or it could be the opposite end where they have zero confidence. They just shrink down into not being seen or not being heard, which can affect them for a lifetime as well.
Exactly. Especially if no one is there to support them and to ask them questions, because then they may think they're not important. And like you said, that definitely can lead itself into adulthood where that person is never advocating for themselves, whether it's in their workforce, or their home, with their significant other.
So a couple of the comments were anger disguised as depression in adolescence, silence equals consent. A couple comments, you want to go look at the comments later because there's some questions to you about Indiana. Isolating, a lot of anxiety and anger in our students who have family members who are undocumented.
Yes. So this next question, as adults, we have our own opinions, but how do you communicate diplomatically? How do you allow for your students to communicate diplomatically? And as a teacher and educator, how do you communicate diplomatically?
I statements.
For sure. And modeling to teach to students how to appropriately use an I statement, that opens up so many doors for not just in school, but in life in general. Knowing how to do an appropriate, well thought out I statement could change the trajectory of how the end of a conversation could end, for sure.
I also wonder about introducing topics ahead of time so they can process it and think about what they want to say. And maybe giving them like a little bookmark with some kind of like conversation responses, sentence starters, or I hear what you're saying, or I don't, kind of like that kind of thing.
Yes. And I like that because I think that could lead into a great Socratic seminar where, hey, here's the topic. I want everyone to write down what you think about it. But now, because whoever's on the inner circle, you're going to have to take what's on the outer circle and read what their questions are or read their thoughts, which I think will help create some, the conversation to remain diplomatic.
So Miriam, for the sake of time, I wonder if we can keep going, because I definitely want to get to the clinical treatment options.
Yes.
And I'm just being mindful of the time.
I didn't even look down. Thank you, Ayana.
But so this slide, I think, is really important for you all as educators to take back into your spaces. And there are 3 questions. Like, if you need to get some time on your PD docket, get some time on your PD docket and introduce this to your teachers. Most schools, especially in a lot of urban areas, do not have the resources to provide therapeutic services. There's a lot of guidance counseling, but not therapeutic services. Or what I have found is many teachers do not have that kind of therapeutic background. They're like, well, I'm not a counselor. I'm not a social worker. There's 3 questions. That's all they need is 3 questions. And it really focuses on transference. Who is the student able to speak to at school? And do they know, right? Empathy. Who listens to you? right? Because you'd be surprised, it might not be the counselor that the child picks first, right? I definitely know some of our, support staff, like our, our kitchen, we call them lunch ladies because they are all lunch ladies, but there's probably a more, professional way of putting that. But the janitorial staff, coaches, of our varying sports team, they get a lot of the feedback that perhaps they don't know. So do the teachers know that they can go talk to Miss Morton in the cafeteria, that they can go talk to coach, et cetera, et cetera. And understanding, why are they listening or not, right? And I'm talking about, why are the students listening to you or not, right? So, when you're giving a lesson, and I really appreciate whoever shouted out the lack of social studies, because that is absolutely a big pet peeve of mine in education. You cut arts, you cut music. Now social studies is shrinking, and these are all socio-emotional subjects, as I like to call them. They connect more to that. But, why are the students listening or not? That is really something that you all, as a school team, as a school staff, if you can answer those 3 questions, you will be in a much better position, whether you're virtual or whether you're brick and mortar, to help usher students, to guide your students through this global pandemic. And it's a dual pandemic. Right. And, a lot of schools are going back in March, which is, pretty controversial, brick and mortar. Some of you are already in brick and mortar, but we don't know what Beyond March has to offer us either. So that's something to think about. These 3 questions can change the conversation in your school building. And then Miriam, if you want to go to the clinical treatment options, I think that's slide 20. Yeah. And then you might have room for a few more questions after that. I would say Acute.
Yes.
Yeah, go to 20. No, slide 20.
Is this, I think that is, let me see. Yeah. That was slide 20. You're talking about.
No. So I'm talking about the clinical.
This one right here. Yep, 22.
22, my bad.
So there are several clinical treatment options that students, parents, families can seek. There are, I'm sure if you have sat in the IEP meeting, they have all these assessments and checklists and things that they do. And so I will click on 1 or 2 so you all, I don't know if it'll, let me just tell me if you can see it. Don't know, Ayana, you think? Well, I'll let you guys.
Questions. Because we're going to leave this we're going to upload it to the Google Docs. So folks will have all of these links.
Exactly. So these are some of the assessments. The KSADS assessment, Children Behavior Checklist, the Pediatric Behavior Rating Scale. There's a parent one and a teacher one. As we know, students show up differently in the house and in the school building. Suicidal, homicidal ideation assessment. Trauma definitely can lead to that. And so we definitely need to make sure we assess that always. Also assessing parents for levels of stress and ASD symptoms. Because just like Ayana said, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. And so if students are experiencing some levels of stress, most likely the parent and families are experiencing some type of stress as well. Therapeutic treatments, prolonged exposure treatment, cognitive processing therapy, and anxiety management training. So just as we stated before, therapy is definitely a route to go to communicate and talk through all of your stress, your anxiety, worries, feelings about any of the topics that we discussed. And like Ayana said, it's more detailed on these links. And it'll be in our files. There are some restorative treatment options for our children as well. Advocating for school emotional safety. Again, those 3 questions that Ayana talked about, that right there is one way to do that. Non-avoidance conversations in classrooms, restorative circles, town halls. Like I said earlier, at my school, we are starting community circles where that's exactly what we'll be focusing on, students' emotional safety. And when I was in the classroom, that was one thing that I did every single Friday. And I even had, I don't know how many of you all have seen the movie Meet the Fockers, and he would say, you're out of my circle of trust, and you know, those things that let students know like, hey, we have to have each other's back in this classroom. If we don't, you know, who else is going to speak for us? Who else is going to vouch for us? And I don't want anybody to get out of my circle of trust. So if you are disrespecting your classmate and vice versa, then your name is going to be outside of that circle. And they didn't like that at all. Gives them tools for empowerment, meditation apps, relaxed melodies, sleep zen sounds. Calm is definitely like the go-to for me. And so those are definitely some other treatment options that we can have for our children. And that brings us to the end. I know there's some questions. We have a good amount of time for, or do we not?
No, I think we're over at 4, right, Janine?
Yes.
I mean, 5.
Well, I'm at 2. So I just am so confused out here on the West Coast.
Yeah,
You know,
it's
right.
but our time is to the end. I didn't have any more questions that were.
I do have a question. I wanted to ask, will we have access to your PowerPoint or can you provide your contact information as well? I just looked in the file. I didn't see anything.
Yeah, we're going to drop it in the file after this session.
This was amazing. Thank you, ladies, so very much.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Mm-hmm.
I love that it was engaging and we got to talk to other participants.
Right. Yes.
That's it. You were